Jan Perry here with Councilmember Paul Krikorian, and this is the Energy and Environment Committee, Tuesday, February the 2nd at 9:10 a.m. in the morning, room 1010. Mr. CLA, are there any items that we can continue or go on consent?
Yes, there are. There are two items we'd like to recommend for consent. Items 1 and 2. One relates to a brownfields grant for the Warkwood Park site, an amount of $200,000 to Environmental Affairs Department to administer. And then item number 2 relates to the transfer of property to the MTA, DWP-owned property. That will leave you with 3-item agenda. All
right, we don't have a quorum at this point, so we'll just hang on and see if one more person shows up, and then we can ratify those two. All right, number 3.
Item number 3 is a motion, Weston Koretz directing the DWP to report on the status of its community underground power line installation program. We have staff from DWP.
Great. And while you're coming up, can somebody tell me why there's no community impact statement on this item? Anybody? Somebody? Anybody? Somebody? Hello?
Hello.
Who are you?
I don't have a statement for community impact.
Do you know, is somebody going to do one at some point?
That is only done if the neighborhood councils actually submit something in writing to the clerk.
Okay,
That's the case that we have not received one.
Okay, so that's the reason why. That's what you can say on the record. All right. Because as you know, undergrounding power lines is a major visual blight issue, especially in some of the lower income parts of the city, throughout the city. So this is a major initiative that you're going to report on. I just want you to realize the significance of it. It's major. It could really transform the way people's communities will look.
I understand. That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay,
go ahead.
All right. Water and Power has requested to report to the City Council on a proposal for a new program that would underground 25% of all utility lines in the entire city of Los Angeles by 2030. I have good news and bad news. The good news is that DWP is already 27% underground for its primary distribution system. The bad news is that I don't think that was really the intent of the motion, because I believe the intent of the motion was to move LA to become more underground. Now, in addition to the 3 programs that we have in our rules for conversion of overhead lines to underground, moving forward, I think the best news is that part of our power reliability program, which was approved by the rate motion we had in April of 2007, it has an initiative to underground 8 miles of lines per year based on reliability purposes. Of course, funding for this is in place because that was part of the rate motion.
So it's part of the what?
The rate motion that we did for PRP. Our goal this year is 1.8 miles. Our next year's goal is 3 miles, and we're ramping up to 8 miles a year, and then do that indefinitely after that. This has a reliability component related to cars, birds, winds, and so on, but of course it has an aesthetic value as well. And 8 miles a year represents about $24 million a year in expenditures. In addition, or as part of this undergrounding initiative, we're also seeking opportunities to partner with other agencies like the Bureau of Engineering to get into streets that are already torn up for other purposes. And to give you an example, we have a project right now where there was going to be just a overhead relocation for 2 miles, and then they actually wanted us to put the overhead back, but the department is using some of its reliability funding to kick up the difference between the overhead relocation and underground to do 2 miles of undergrounding, and that was a way of leveraging money and get more done.
Have you looked at the San Diego program?
Yes, I have.
And I know that it's a surcharge-based program.
Yes. In fact, this is their brochure right here. Just a couple things of what the other utilities are doing. Edison spends $45 million a year on 430 cities. They're typically 3 times larger than us when it comes to sales, so $24 million for us is a little better than what they're doing on a percentage basis. San Diego spends $50 million a year in the city of San Diego based on a surcharge. Anaheim has probably the most aggressive program. They're spending 4% of their revenue on a surcharge for the underground program. If we were to scale that to the Department of Water and Power, that would be $120 million a year towards underground if we had the same type of program.
And what time frame, though, if we were to do that?
Well, what they did was they had a vote and they approved the 4% surcharge. So they're spending since they're 1/10 our size, they're spending about 10 to 14 million a year on undergrounding. So since it'd be 10 times more for us, since we have, it'd be about 120 million a year range if we spent that kind of money, same program that they had. But they've made a big difference down there, and what they did, they had 3 initiatives. One of them was to get the lines underground. The second thing was to get billboards down, and the third one was to get signage for businesses down to street level. So it's made a big difference over there. Pasadena typically spends 2% of their revenues on undergrounding, according to the survey I did, and Burbank is targeting specific poles on major streets. So that's what our neighbors are doing.
So what percentage of our city's power infrastructure at this point is underground?
27%.
And then you enunciated a goal of 27% more by 2030, or what's your goal by 2030?
Well, our goal right now is through the PRP, the Power Reliability Program, is to do 8 miles a year, ramping up to 8 miles a year, and then 8 miles every year after that, perpetually.
And then what's the percentage that you would be at by your target of 2030?
Let's see, I don't have that one in front of me. We have about 5,500 miles of overhead, including back office, residential, and so on. And so to the extent that you do 20 years at about 8 or 7.
Let me change.
It'd be about 140 miles out of
Okay.
5,000.
Okay, what about this? Your capital programs at this point, do they call for the undergrounding of power facilities?
Our capital program, in addition to the Power Reliability Program, it depends on what facilities we have out there. For system growth work, we have a lot of those are put in through underground, just through normal course of business. Some of them are just rebuilds of existing pole lines. Typically from the 80s, our overhead system hasn't grown, but the underground mileage has gone up.
Okay, I'll tell you what I want you to do on this so that we can get a better sense of where you are on this, where the department is on that. We may need to do a motion to discuss a request or requirement of the underground power lines
Okay.
on the front end, new construction, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I need from you, and I want the CLA to document this, what your existing capital program calls for with respect to the undergrounding of power facilities, and if so, in what areas of the city has this taken place, and what is the schedule for the implementation of that call?
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, usually you want to know what we're doing overall in the totality.
I want to see how it spreads out, dots on a map, GPS, GIS, whatever.
That's fine.
Okay, and then you work with CLA and with Jeff Catalano in my office. And if we can get this back in here in 30 days, because I don't think this is ready to, well, we don't have enough people to vote today anyway, but I don't think it's ready to move out of committee anyway.
Yeah.
Mr. Krikorian, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just building upon your suggestions, I also think it would be important for the council to understand how routes would be prioritized.
Yes.
What areas, not only where you're planning to do it, but why you're selecting one area over another.
Okay.
And I'm very interested in seeing specifically what DWP is doing internally to coordinate the infrastructure replacement programs regarding water with the undergrounding of power. Because as we're replacing our 100-year-old water infrastructure throughout the city, it seems to me that if it's practical to do, there are opportunities for cost savings there by coordinating those two efforts.
Right.
I just don't know whether it's practical to do. So I'd be interested in knowing more than that, more about that. And then finally, whatever the overall cost of this program is for undergrounding, I'd be interested in seeing an analysis of what the ratepayer impacts of that will be as well. Not just the gross amount of money, but how is that going to affect the typical ratepayer in Los Angeles?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Let's get this back in committee in 30 days.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next item.
And for the record, I'm Marvin Moon, Director of Engineering for Power
Thank
System.
you.
Thank
And what was your name?
My name is Rodolfo Monroy, but I had a question for you. Did you ever receive our current undergrounding program report?
We heard that you had submitted that report. We checked with the city clerk's office. We couldn't track it
We
down.
have a copy with us now if you'd like to take that now.
You can leave a copy and then make sure we incorporate
Yeah.
that into your presentation in 30 days, too.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, item number 4, item number 4 relates to DWP report in response to motion on Perry relative to levels of contaminants contained in drinking water. We have staff from Department of Water and Power.
Great.
Present this.
Great.
Good morning. I'm Pankaj Parak. I'm the Director for Water Quality at the Department of Water and Power. And when I heard about the Environmental Working Group report and your concerns, I knew it would be great to take opportunity to explain what that report was all about. The Environmental Working Group is a special interest group that evaluates all sorts of environmental issues. In this case, they chose the drinking water environment to look at the number of chemicals that are being found by drinking water utilities across the nation. The basic point they wanted to make was that there are a lot more chemicals in the environment today, and that the regulatory framework, the Environmental Protection Agency, is not doing a sufficient job, and they need to do more to have more regulations. If that was where they ended it, there would have been no difficulties for us, because that's true. There's lots more chemicals, and more regulations are always good for the environment. However, they ranked the city of Los Angeles in the low 80s out of 100, and that's when I was extremely disappointed. When I actually saw the methods that they used to evaluate the utilities, I was surprised that they did not rank us 100. Because basically what they were doing was identifying how many chemicals were being discovered in the source waters, how frequently they're being discovered, and how much of it there was there, and how they compared against their own standards, not the federal, not the state standards, but their own standards. So we said, fine, let's take a look at that. Well, the city of Los Angeles, and especially our department, prides itself in doing more than what is necessary. So we look for more chemicals, we look for it more frequently, we look for them at a much lower level than any other utilities do. So sure enough, the database has a lot more chemicals that we are keeping a vigilant eye on, and we look for them early. We provide that information to the regulatory framework so that it helps them in the future to put some new regulations in place, but they need to know what is being found out there. So we are one of the utilities that actually helps the regulatory framework for these kinds of.
Can you tell us the difference, for example, between trace detection water quality approach and a water quality approach that takes lifetime averages, and tell me which approach the department uses, and how that assures that the public's health and welfare is protected?
Sure. There are basically two types of chemical contaminants. Those that have an acute health effect, which means, whatever the limit is set for, you make sure you don't exceed it on an instantaneous value. So the first time you do it, or any time you do it, you cannot exceed that value because it's got an acute health effect. Most of the chemicals that are being regulated now in the United States are long-term, carcinogenic properties. They may cause cancer, they may cause toxic effects, but over time. So what the regulation does, and the science behind it, is monitor for it. They set a standard, and they say make sure on an annual average you do not exceed that. A single dose of something is not necessarily of concern. The concern is that over a certain number of years, you do not exceed the total aggregate of what your body would consume from that. The Environmental Working Group decided to have its own interpretation of this, and instead of, accepting and acknowledging that a single value would not be appropriate, they went ahead and evaluated utilities against the single value with a little asterisk at the end of the table saying, oh, by the way, the regulatory compliance is on an annual average. But the message was still based on their own way of looking at it. Then they went ahead and called it a legal limit, which was also very misleading because that is not the legal limit.
So the impact of our conservation programs, and then there's the Owens Lake settlement, and those kinds of things, we're getting a lot less water from Northern California, and even the LA aqueduct. So we're in a position now where we have to pull more from our groundwater. And the problem I think that we've had with our groundwater sources is some well-documented history of contamination and contamination risks from industrial sources. So tell us on the record what the department is doing to clean up water sources derived from places like the San Fernando Basin and whether or not this water ultimately is safe to drink.
Yeah, that's a great question. Until recent years, most of our practice, whenever we discovered groundwater contamination to a level that could be of concern or something that starts making us feel uncomfortable, we would just take the wells out of service. Well, it's reached a point where 60% of our wells are now out of service, just so that we can preserve the quality of water that we serve from the groundwater. That's not acceptable. Given exactly what you're saying, we are going to have to rely more and more on our groundwater. So we have just initiated a program for what we call a groundwater purification complex. It's going to be a hefty sum, but it's something we have to do. The pollution of parts of the San Fernando Basin are related to polluting parties. It's a legal issue. It takes a while to go after them. But meanwhile, we have decided we can't wait to let the legal machinery resolve this. We're going to go ahead and do a very advanced groundwater treatment facility to be built, and then start using that groundwater and serving it to our customers.
A few years ago, the department discovered bromate in the Silver Lake Reservoir, and I think they put plastic balls
Shade balls.
Yeah, and I don't quite understand the science behind that, but if you could just use that as an example on whether or not that resolved the issue.
Thank you. Yes, it did resolve the issue very well, beyond our expectations. Basically, bromide, which is a natural chemical that's found in groundwater. We used to be under the ocean at some point, many years ago, and there's bromide in our groundwater, as is many other groundwater sources. But bromide by itself is not harmful, but when bromide combines with chlorine in the presence of sunlight, it forms bromate. That was, until very recently, not really heard of, and something we discovered ourselves. Because when we started finding some high bromate values, we said, what's going on? And we discovered that in some of our reservoirs, especially the ones that have a lot of groundwater go through it, and we chlorinate our water as a disinfectant, in the presence of sunlight, it was beginning to form bromates. It takes a long time to mitigate a living reservoir. We could not just, cut that supply off in all the reservoirs, so we needed something very quickly to be done. And one of our staff, a genius actually, said, what about these shade balls that the airports use that could perhaps prevent the amount of sunlight that is necessary to form bromates? And we said, who uses that? And the airports use it to dissuade birds from landing on water bodies. Mm-hmm. Well, lo and behold, it worked very well. It allows only 4% of the sunlight to get through. That was more than sufficient to stop the process of bromate formation. The question was, we wanted to make sure that the plastic that is used in this has to be certified, as does any other product that we touch drinking water with, has to be certified by NSF. There was only one vendor in the United States at that time who had that product available. Everybody, the McDonald's balls and stuff, same material, but most of these manufacturers had not gone ahead and got NSF certification because nobody thought we would need them for drinking water purposes. Well, this guy lucked out, but he had a great order from us. We got those balls. We put them in, deployed them at Ivanhoe Reservoir and Elysian Reservoir. Silver Lake was way too much, and it needed too many balls at that time to do. But we managed the operations in such a way that we can still manage just serving through Ivanhoe and Elysian, and we've taken Silver Lake offline only to manage peak requirements of water in the system.
That's your overall reservoir protection plan that you've implemented?
Yes, and in fact, it's doing so well, Councilperson, that we are now going to use them for the remaining reservoirs that we're going to have until we finally cover them or bypass them.
Okay. All right, no other questions?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just briefly, when that bromide incident occurred, the Silver Lake Reservoir was emptied completely and the bottom cleaned and so forth. Was it not possible to utilize that water in some way through our recycled water program or recharging groundwater or in some other way other than emptying it to the ocean?
Right. Terrific question. We tried both for Elysian Reservoir and Silver Lake Reservoirs. Both of those, we did the best we could. We managed to actually save some of the water. The problem was plumbing, to get the water from there to some other places. the transportation of that water was a major issue, and you didn't want unintended consequences to the environment by then using more transportation for that water and so forth. But wherever we could, we made you see Silver Lake, how green it is. We used as much as we could there. Elysian was a better environment to use the water for that. But then we also were on a time frame. We wanted to get rid of this, get the new water back in there, so in case we needed the supply, we would have it. So we did the best we could. It was not all sent out to the ocean, but the most we could, we tried to do that and use it for the environment.
And similarly, you talked about the program that you're planning for cleanup of the San Fernando Valley groundwater basin, and I really appreciate that. But at the same time, because contaminants are a function both of the amount of the contaminant and the amount of clean water in which that contaminant is found. Isn't it also the case that by doing more to recharge the groundwater and replenish that basin and bring it up to capacity, that has profound water quality improvement benefits as well that might be even more cost effective than the cleanup processes that you're talking about?
It would be, in principle, yes, you're absolutely right. The places where we have the contaminants are so heavily contaminated that even if I doubled the cleanup water there, it would not suffice.
And I'm not suggesting they're mutually exclusive. We certainly need to do both. But
Yes.
a part of the equation, and I believe a very cost-effective part of the equation, needs also to be replenishing that groundwater. Wouldn't
Yes.
you agree with that principle?
Oh, right on. And that's where we are also in parallel trying to develop the groundwater replenishment program that Orange County has now initiated. We would like to do the same thing and augment the groundwater supply.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Again, no quorum, so I guess, did you want to continue this, or?
You can continue it if you like, or if you'd like to have this discussion in council, you could forward the motion there.
I think we can forward this one to council.
Okay.
Without recommendation. Okay. All right. Before we go into closed session, we do have one speaker card from Dr. Clyde Williams, and I'd like to give him the opportunity to come up now, and we'll hold public comment now, so he doesn't have to wait, because I don't know how long we'll be in there. So this is the time for public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Feel free to come forward and comment right now. And Dr. Williams, you did fill out a card, so why don't you come on up?
Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA. Lids. Does anyone know what a lid is? Well, we're going to have rain this weekend, so my house will generate enough stormwater to fill roughly 10 50-gallon drums. The lid, low impact development, is something like the nose of a camel. This is the first way that the stormwater program is going to start expanding the fees. And the lid is supposed to be that everybody does a little bit, and that is supposed to control stormwater. Well, it doesn't. The requirement is for maximum 2 50-gallon drums per house for any new development or reconstruction. So what is the purpose of it? Because it's ineffective. The purpose of it is to get people on the road, on the railroad tracks, going down towards the end of the bridge. And this is to justify eventually the stormwater overall program, which was rejected last year with an $8 billion capital improvement program, which by their own numbers will cost us roughly $500 million a year. And last year they wanted a $50 stormwater fee on the county. Well, that was just the beginning. And eventually it will be $500 per plot. So piecemealing is being done by the stormwater program. They don't want to come in with the whole program because, especially during the current crisis, it would be unpopular. So we need to have a 245 process against the LID program. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Williams, appreciate it. All right, any other opportunity, any other public comment speaker come up now? If not, do we have a city attorney in here?
Yes, you do.
Okay, but we don't have one to give the admonition. We're going to go into closed session. Do you
Yeah,
want-
she'll do that.
Can you do that?
She could do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Madam Chair, just real quickly, on item number 4, there is a report on file that DWP submitted on the water contamination issue. Do you want to forward that as well with that recommendation, or note and file that?
Well, we can't note and file, right, because we don't have a quorum.
We'll forward as a communication from the chair.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Let's do it like that.
Okay.
Note and file as a communication from the chair.
Okay.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind giving us the admonition, I would appreciate it.
Sure. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.1A, the committee will be going into closed session to meet with its counsel regarding a confidential settlement.
Okay, so only meeting. We're back.
back on.
All right, we're back online, just coming out of closed session. There are no further items, and we've already held public comment, so we will now adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.